Okay, hi everybody. My name is Professor Kalsee. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight in DiviNation Academy. I'm super pumped. So this is Shintoism part 2. If you didn't see part 1, that's totally okay. It's already on the YouTube channel. I'm pretty positive. So if you go to youtube.com and search DiviNation Academy, you'll find it there. So this is part 2. So the first part we did a lot of the history, the culture, the practices. We really dug deep into that part of Shintoism. For part 2, I'm digging deep more into the actual mythologies and the stories. We're going to talk about specific kami, like 4 of the major ones that really play key roles. We're also going to talk about other entities that pop up into Shintoism. And then I also talk a lot actually in my study guide, and I'm going to talk a lot about tonight about how you can actually integrate Shintoism super easy with other practices like Wicca or Kemetics or even like Norse pagans. Honestly, Shintoism really blends really well with a lot of different practices because of its core beliefs, and it doesn't have any attachment to dogma and things like that, which is really nice. So we're going to talk about that a lot tonight too. Um, Personally, I am picking this because I'm doing a series. We're going to work our way across the globe. Actually, I shouldn't say globe. We're going to work our way across the earth. Um, and I started on the Far East, so we're starting with Shintoism, but I also personally practice Shintoism. I love Shintoism. It's a cornerstone to my beliefs on how I view myself in this realm, how I view myself in my connections to energies, how I view how energies work. So that's a huge reason why I'm super excited to do this. Little bit of housekeeping before we get going. In case you're new watching this recording, again, my name is Professor Kalsee. I'm also one of the co-owners of DiviNation Academy as well. Um, and we are an academy that teaches pagan beliefs and actually a lot of beliefs at this point, a lot of different schools of thought. And we believe that education should be free and accessible to all. So that's really what we're offering to you. So thank you for joining us. Subscribe if you want to get notifications. And you can also find our study guides on divinationacademy.com. Okay, so done with that part. Let's begin. You can pull up the study guide if you would like to follow along. I try to stay as close to it as I can since that is writings coming from my brain. But my brain does like to jump around, so you may get other information and a lot more other stuff popped into there too. If you have questions, you can, like I said, jump in if you want, put it in the chat, whatever you would like to do. So this study guide is really, it's meant to accompany this class. So, but you can also read it on your own. So if you're following along and you're watching on YouTube, this should be on the website. You should be able to follow it. I should have gotten it up by now. And obviously live, you can follow it now. And we're obviously talking about this October. So I did kind of write it, mixing this in with October and kind of dealing with the energies that we're dealing with now. So again, big thing is Shintoism is, you know what animism is? It's really has a big pull on animism, which I talked about in the brief underneath, and I talked about in part 1. So it's really a core central belief that everything around us, like everything from inanimate objects to the wind rustling through the leaves on the trees around you, to the person next to you, to the water flowing in the rivers, to the dirt on the countertop. Everything around you has energy, has consciousness, has a being. It's all part of source, it's all part of one. And all of that energy needs to be acknowledged. It all needs to be respected. And we all need to live in harmony with all of those energies. So that's one thing that's really great with Shintoism that I really, really love that focuses on and makes it really easy to integrate within other belief systems is that key core concept right there is that it requires harmony with everything and with all energies and understanding and accepting all energies. So even when later we talk about yokai, which some people, if you watch anime and you've been introduced to it that way, they would look at them as like more like mischievous troublemakers, like evil. I hate that word, but evil entities. I'm using it just because most people like that word. I don't even allow my son to learn what that word means. Much I don't like that word. But those type of entities, people would classify them that. In Shintoism, they're not even classified that way. They're classified as chaotic energy, which doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It simply needs to be respected and revered in harmony in a different way. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So that is, again, if you missed part one, that's a really core key concept. Another thing that I super love about the Shintoism belief system, which makes it actually very unique to any other belief system around the world, is it has no dogma set into it, and it has literally no centralized text. It doesn't have these strict rules. It doesn't have these strict regulations. It doesn't have strict doctrines. It doesn't have a central prophet. It doesn't have a single holy book. None of that. It has none of that. Like, none of that is a part of it. It is very, very nature based. It is very, very much, we are going to revere the kami, we're going to revere the spirits, we're going to revere the divine essences around us. We don't need rules. We don't need these holy books. We don't need these texts. We don't need these structures. The two texts that they do have, they're more of historical records of interactions with these beings and interactions with humans, also historical records from an imperial standpoint, because certain deities, for example, like Amaterasu, if the emperor believes that he is a direct descendant of her specifically, so like they kept track of like that grave detail for that reason and historical reasons. But other than that, like, there's stories. It's a lot of oral tradition passed down. It's not these rhythmic doctrines that you have to follow all these rules. It's communal rituals. It's tradition. it's and tradition changes too, because it happens throughout experiments. It's based on folklore. It's based on experience that each specific villager has had with a kami that may only be prevalent to that one specific village because of relationship that they have that specific kami, or with that specific yokai too. So it really, really teaches that. And at its core, it's very, very core tenet, which I did teach in class one, is the wa, which is harmony, which really at its core teaches that humans, nature, and divine, all three of those parts, we are all interconnected in an incredibly seamless web of life. And that entire philosophy really resonates around that, which again is why it blends so well with so many different pagan paths, why it's a great cornerstone piece to have, and why it can blend with pagan paths. Even in historical context, which I'll talk about it a little bit later, but even in historical context, in around I believe it's AD, Buddhism even really seamlessly starts to blend with it really well. There's actually even a branch of Buddhism that's very much related to Shintoism and its own belief system there. So we even see that fluid really again with that. It also is why it makes it really modern, and it emphasizes respect and purity, and then also understanding that there's sacredness in everything. Absolutely everything. It's not just a God that's sacred, it's everything that around you. It's not just the big things that are sacred. It's not even in like the big good things and the big devastating things. Those aren't just what's sacred, it's the ordinary. It's that every single tiny moment experience thing that happens is divine, and it matters, and it's sacred, and it's all interconnected and interwoven together. And it's all there to make source experience things, and we're there to experience it. So it's really, really fluid in that, which is what's really awesome with Shintoism. And again, why for me, it very easily became a no-brainer to become a core central belief for me. I mean, if you've listened to a lot of my teachings, even now as I'm probably talking about it, you probably can see kind of, you're starting to see where a lot of my core stuff comes from, and you're starting to see kind of, if I couldn't explain it before, it may be starting to click a little bit more now. That's why I've been waiting to actually teach this class, but I didn't know if people were ready either. Because Shintoism it's this amazing, beautiful thing, but it's really hard to put into practice at the same time. It's hard. It's that simple thing that ends up being complex. That complex thing that's super simple, which is duality in and of itself as well. And then Shintoism also, again, has an essence in the celebration of life cycles. So we really, really emphasize making sure, and and pagans do too, we're like very aware of that. We're very, very joyous when the bloom of the spring happens. We're very reflective in harvest and autumn. We make sure, I mean, all throughout the seasons, we do rituals of cleansing and connecting and renewal. Renewal is super, super, super important in Shintoism. it's so important that even the most biggest massive shrine to Kamionari and like Amaterasu, like it gets torn down and rebuilt completely from the ground up every 20 years. And that's simply for renewal and to make sure that they're showing grandeur and renewal and giving new offerings to her and honoring the cycles of renewal. But like every 20 years, they completely tear it down and rebuild it back up in something completely new and just as magnificent as it was before, simply for that aspect. So honoring that cycle is also very, very important in the Shinto religion. And you'll see that when we go through the myths here and with all the different kami. And again, I talked about it before, they don't have a centralized text. They don't have like that holy book like the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, or they don't have that. They don't have that, but they do have a set of collection of stories and oral traditions and myths. And there are some that are super key. So we're going to talk about that a little bit down the road, but there's not a lot, but we will talk about that. But there's lots and lots of different stories when you actually go and you talk to people and you read about people, because there's so many intimate experiences that people of Japan will have with these being in these entities like on a daily basis. So it really, really does show you that, like I said, that there is magic, sacredness, and divine in everything, and absolutely. It reminds you to understand the duality of everything, the destructiveness, the creation, the dark, the light, really understanding nature's dual nature at its core. So even understanding that if nature has duality, we therefore as humans do. They even believe that inanimate objects, like a family heirloom, like a mirror or a weathered stone or a mountain path or a house even, can end up becoming a kami. And they are a kami and they can embody that very own energy and they have their own divineness infused in them. So it really is believed that it's in every single existence. I talk to my house. I talk to my home. Like I know its energy and its feeling, and it's actually different in each room. And like you can talk to, like you can feel those things, those objects. Like I'm constantly talking out loud, and people kind of think, it's not just my personalities I'm talking to, but it's just because you feel the energy of the kami and everything around you. So you communicate with it in order to try to make your life and theirs more harmonious together. Um, that's also when I know I need to renew and I need to cleanse, because my home will let me know. Like it speaks to me and lets me know. And if I'm not listening, it gets really loud. So understanding that and understanding that there is divine infused in literally in every single corner of our existence, our day, and our life. And you're able to find that. And it also allows you to be much more present in life and in magic and with your energy. Which is really, really what's lovely about Shintoism and why it integrates also really well with pagan beliefs, many different pagan beliefs. Um, let's see, what other thing did I want to talk about? The other thing that's really important that I wanted to make sure to talk on before we get into like all the myths and everything to make sure we remembered is that it's also very important that there is no like moral code that's enforced by fear of punishment like there is in so many other belief systems. There is no like, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go here, you're not going to go here. There's no karma, there's no hell. Like that's not a thing. But they do believe in the fact that you do have kato dama, which is you thrive on that spiritual power of your words through chants and invocations and prayers, and that your spoken words and your spoken wish can actually ripple throughout the entire realm to infect not only you but all the kami around you, and that you end up being a dialogue and a conduit for divine dialogue throughout all of that, which then in turn allows you to be able to come back in reincarnation in life. They believe in that as possible. I go way deeper into this in part one, but just remembering that because that moral code, just because there isn't this super strict moral code that's enforced, doesn't mean that there isn't that awareness. It doesn't mean that they don't understand the effect that they have on everything around them. I mean, that's why if I have unfortunately not been to Japan yet, but if you listen, if you talk to, if you learn more about the culture and even watch about the culture, that's why even like it's a very fast apology, even for the slightest of bump on somebody. And there's very, very polite, lots of manners, very much focused on that because that's going to come back. You want to make sure you're in harmony. You want to make sure that those words are spoken because they have power and they ripple. And that's why also like chants are super important. The rituals are super important. The community rituals are super important when you're at your kamidana and praying, and doing things like that throughout your day, which I talk about in part 1 too. I really break down the kamidana. So historically, if you don't know from part 1, Shintoism originated in prehistoric Japan around 300 BCE, and it really evolves as very animistic practices. It goes through quite a few different periods, the Jomon, the Yogai, the Edo, and it survives most of it, almost all of it, without much like shutting down of it. We have the Kojiku, which in 720 CE is Japan's oldest chronicle, and the Nihon Shokai, which is in 720 CE. That's the 2 documents that we actually have for its official history that actually codify its belief system. So if you want to read some, that's where I would start. And it's where you really find a lot of compelling myths of the creation and the divine descent from all of Shinto's literary backbone and all of its documentation that it really comes from. And there's some differences between the 2, but not a ton. So you'll be able to find and see that if you go through it. I also talk about that a lot in class 1, so you can check that there. And then, like I said before, in about the 6th century CE, Shintoism actually does really synchronize with Buddhism. It creates this very dualistic system. That's actually how I myself found Shintoism on its own, in my own personal practice. Is I was on quite a long journey with Buddhism alone, and I was going through very many different versions, different paths, different sects of Buddhism, and I actually came across Shintoism this way, is because it had been synchronized with Shintoism and Buddhism had been synchronized together. In about 1868, it was ended up restored to where it really kind of separated the 2 again from Buddhism to Shintoism, because it actually was nationalized Japan's official, like, governmental religion. So then you see that in World War II, it kind of doesn't have quite as much of a importance, except for like the imperial worship part, and then ends up getting some kind of like militaristic interpretations. And then now today, it's actually really gone a lot more back to its main folk roots, and it's really back more towards that solid Shintoism. You do still see some of that Buddhism synchronism, but like I said, that's how I found it. But again, super important. They have about 80,000 different shrines, really kind of all over the place. Like I said, the main one, which is there to represent Amaterasu and Inari, gets rebuilt every 20 years. It's actually kind of fun to watch it get torn down and come back up. I watch it like online. You can watch videos and they like the articles and how they change. And then obviously, like, Shintoism has actually really blended more into modern day culture and pop culture with anime, like, which is huge. Anime is becoming a lot more popular, especially in the United States. So you're actually seeing a lot of those beliefs, and they actually do get decent amount of it accurate quite often. So that's where you're also seeing it, and another reason kind of why I'm talking about it too, because I want to make sure that if people are going down that path and they kind of are interested, they have a way to kind of connect to it. Okay, so I've been talking a lot actually as I've been going over the summary of like class 1 and like what Shintoism is, how to integrate it, and how it does integrate really well with other pagan beliefs and systems. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to talk about it now. I might actually leave you guys to kind of like read it a lot. I'll talk about it maybe a little bit more. But the biggest reason is because it does have that fluidity. It has that fluidity and that ability because it doesn't have that dogma. It doesn't have those strict doctrines. It doesn't have that exalted prophet. And because of its whole root in animism, it allows that openness up for energy and allows you to be able to understand that like the divine really isn't just like out there. Like, it's not just out there somewhere. Like, the divine is all wrapped up around you. Like, it's the wind on your skin, it's the sound of somebody's voice that you're hearing, it's the rice that you feel in the bowl, it's a fox crossing your path when you're walking across the road. It's literally all there, and it's all full of magic, and it's all that we experience all the time, which is how we're even able to be fully alive, is because of the magic and the energy of the kami and the energy of source and all of that. And because we're all connected to that, we all have access to that, which is why it so easily integrates. Another reason why it like integrates so well, this is one of the very few belief systems I have come across in my many years now of studying cultures and religions across the earth that does not have any really type of indoctrination. It doesn't have any concern of conversion. It doesn't have any concern about that whatsoever at all. There's no preaching, there's none of that. When it comes to Shintoism, it's very much about enrichment. It's allowing you to live in harmony seamlessly with it. Therefore, it makes it really easy to be fluid and put those beliefs and build them into what you're already doing, creating a much more richer and a much more interconnected practice. It allows you to do that. Another reason for me personally why I really love it as well is it allows me to be so much more present. It allows me to be more present in my life. It allows me to be more present in my emotions I'm feeling. It allows me to be more present in my experiences. It allows me to be more present with my magic, with my energy work, with connecting with source, with understanding like my own divinity and sovereignty and all the divinity and sovereignty around me. It allows you to anchor and be very, very present when nothing is quite so ordinary and everything is so divine and sacred. I mean, something as that most people find so boring, just driving down the back roads to get into town to go get supplies for the week, to me is like such a sacred experience because of how I experience every single hawk, every single eagle, every single bird, every single fox crossing the road, every single raccoon, every single thing I see is such a divine, sacred experience that I experience on this very thing that's supposed to be mundane for everyday life. So that's something that's really great about it too, that really, really allows it to allow you to connect a lot more. Because in those moments, you're remembering that that is something that is divine, that is part of source. It has experienced reality just as much and as brightly as I am, in just as a sovereign and divine way. And it's really, really lovely. And it's really, really nice and anchoring. It allows those very, very ordinary things to just become extraordinary and magical no matter what's happening. Um, Even if it's something that's like devastatingly chaotic, it's still going to be magical and it's going to make it a much more interconnected experience. Sometimes it allows you to feel a little bit overwhelmed. Obviously, with energy, if you're going to allow yourself to be open up to all of that all the time. But great grounding exercises really, really help. So there's that, but that is awesome with it. When it comes to Wiccan integration, the biggest way that I find that I can integrate it with that type of practice if that is what you practice. If you haven't been with me before and you're watching the recording, I do not practice Wicca. It's not something that connects with me. I do not like practicing a religion that was put together in the 1950s for some very interesting reasons, and I don't agree with a lot of its philosophies. But if Wicca is something you want to integrate it with, the best way that I would recommend doing it is blending it with more of like your circle castings. That way, like for example, you can anchor each direction with a specific kami, or even a yokai if you want to. I don't see Wiccans really wanting to work with yokai, but you may. So for example, you could have Amaterasu in the south so that your sun really flares and fires up a lot more warmer. You can have Susanoo in the west, so his storms can really cleanse your sight. You can have Inari in the north for your earth bounties. And then you can have Fujian in the east for your winds and things like that. So you can add that so you can blend it specifically and understand the kami's presence are still integrated with your circle. So that's one way that you can do that. And in the guide, I do give you kind of really good exercises and breakdowns on how to do that. I give you a practical use and also a reflection if you like. When it comes to Druid integration, if you'd like to really integrate it with Druid practices, this one's actually pretty easy, to be fairly honest, because Druids are very much, they are considered themselves land guardians. So understanding that kami are everywhere and everything, and they're part of everything that's in nature is going to be a very seamless integration to make. But what you can do is you can choose to honor them instead. So you can honor Inari, with actually literally just taking rice. You can say a prayer to it and give it as an offering, leave it at an altar for her. And the next day you can go and actually just bury it and plant it in the ground if you'd like. So where it's going to be planting and growing, you're actually offering it as a rite then. You make sure that you work with chants and speaking, which is a very already Druid thing. And then during the solstice gathering too, and you can also have small Torii gates there as well. I love having Torii gates when it comes to Sabbats and solstice. The portals they open up is quite fascinating. So you can do things like that to integrate with Druidic. When it comes to Kemetic, which again, that's Egyptian, if you're not used to that, you can use it by really like offering and like blending with other deities, is more kind of what I would do. So for example, you could blend Susanoo more with Set because they're both pretty ferocious. They both, in the best ways. But like that rage, that destruction, like you can really, really kind of blend them together. You could blend Amaterasu with Ra or even like Isis and Amaterasu if you'd like to, for like healing, for like the power of the sun and fire and all that fun stuff. So you could do things like that when it comes to Kemetic integration. And then obviously it's like your eclectic pagan and you just kind of like pull from everywhere, which is me, I guess. Yes, I don't know. No, it's hard to explain. But yeah, kind of me. But then what you can do is you can actually choose to kind of pull where you want to. You can mix yokai sigils with your own to be really creative with your magic. So for example, you can choose a tengu for wisdom. If you're really looking for wisdom spells and like things like that, you can choose like Amaterasu for love and light and healing spells if you want, create sigils for that. You can mix, have them, their symbols on your altars. It's really, when it comes to eclectic paganism, you can really integrate it really seamlessly. You can choose to have them entered in your prayers. You can have them casted in your circles. You can add them to your sigils. You can add them to your chants. You can add them to your spell bottles. Representation, any of the kami, you could definitely choose to do so. And then lastly here on the integration part, and then I'll jump in and see if you guys have questions before we go dig into the myths here. My own personal integration. I've talked about it in lots of different classes. I've talked about it here where I really often talk about how Shintoism really is a cornerstone of my practice. I've talked about a little bit in this class already. I find great harmony really in my daily life, having it as a foundation. It really helps me understand my place in this realm. It helps me understand that I am no better than anybody else. Nobody is below me. It helps me understand that we're all on the same energetic playing field. We're all interconnected. We're all interwoven. But just because that's all true doesn't mean that I am not a kick-ass divine sovereign being full of magnitude and power, just like everybody else. So it allows you to feed yourself up while also keeping yourself back in reality too, so that you don't swing one way or the other, which is really, really great for me. Like personally, like that's super important for me. It really helps me stay connected. It really helps me understand that. It also really, really allows me to be connected to all the different energies around me. Like I was talking to you about how on my drive, like it is, I notice absolutely everything. It's something that's like, because I am connected to this belief system even when we're hiking, like with my family, like it's quite amazing like what my husband will notice and pay attention to on hikes versus what intuitively I am energetically connected to. Any animal, anything that comes with will be coming. I will know what's there far before he will. I will know what's coming. I will be fully aware, fully conscious that energy is there. I know what's going on. I know what it's thinking. I know what direction it's going. He'll be more connected to like a specific type of tree and like where it is and things like that. But like for me, like if there's plants, if there's animals, if there's things that are speaking that want to be seen, want to be heard, our energy is connected and flowing, like it is, I'm connected to it. So it's something that allows that awareness to also be there for you. It allows it to sharpen your awareness in every moment. It makes it to where you notice the slightest uptick in the wind rustling even around you in the trees, where you know that Fujan's breath carrying whispers of change. It makes you notice that simple bowl of rice that's sitting on your table no longer is just a simple bowl of rice. It is an absolute divine gift of sustenance and abundance coming to you from Hinari. And without that bowl of rice, who knows like where you would be, but like you had that connection. It's noticing that like silence is the Tengu's call and the mountain calling you in. So your inner strength and your flight, and for you to train and hone your skills and to be able to move forward. This type of integration for me personally has really, really allowed, again, to be present, allowed me to know what our realm we live in is like. Prior to this, I am actually saddened to know how much I may have actually missed of the magic that was going on around me. And I noticed this actually even this summer as I was paying attention to other people when my family and I would be out and about, even hiking. Like the things that I would notice, my family would notice and pay attention in nature that was going on that was so beautiful and magical. We would watch countless other people just walk by and not even notice what's happening and going on around them. So this belief system really allows me to sink into that, to get to be present and connected to that. And again, it makes me sad to kind of think of what I may have missed prior to that. So like again, it turns those very mundane, simple things into a sacred communion that's really divine. It allows you to even understand and like find solace where you need to go. It allows you to be able to have, and like without this shame also attached to it, because you don't have, like I said, you don't have those strict guidelines with punishment and fear attached to them. It's you need to find that tilt and that balance to get yourself back into harmony there, and that's on you to find, 'cause it's going to look different for everybody in every different situation. But you use those renewals, you use purification, you use your chants, you use your words, you use your connection to the kami to get you there. So allowing that to do that allows you to have that harmony, allow you to feel that, and allow you to remember again, like you don't have that fear, that dogma, those strict rules sitting there trying to force you into a state of balance. Instead, like you alone are responsible for your state of balance, and you are the one that's going to figure out how you're going to be in harmony with everything around. Okay, let's see. Do we have any questions at all before I jump into myths? Okay. And if you're watching the recording, and even now, I'm gonna probably butcher some enunciations. I promise you, I'm working on it. I've started learning Japanese. It's a lot harder than I thought. Um, so I'm doing my best. If it's wrong, I apologize. I know it's probably wrong. But I will be doing my best for you. So in the myths and legends, like I said, there's not a ton, but we're gonna go over the ones that are really important. And again, these are whispered throughout generations. Most of them started as oral traditions, and then most the ones that I've picked out are on both of those sets of scrolls, so the Koijiki and the Nohan Shoki. And they do have that there. One is going to be the main one is actually about creation and how the Japan creation, especially specifically Japan's creation. They have their very own creation myth. It's actually super important. It's one of the only like really, really main ones. The rest of them are like myths and legends, but this one's super, super important. And it's at the heart of Shinto ancient lore. So when it comes to Japan's creation myth, it does involve a spear and then the birth of the islands, and then it also involves the birth of kami and even yokai, and all of that. So long before like anything was here, according to Japanese Shinto religion, before the world was even woven, it was literally put together from light and shadow, and there was really just this vast formless ocean. It's the primordial sea of chaos, which, by the way, pops up in a lot of myths and religions, which I've talked about in other classes. So here we are again at the primordial sea of chaos. And I always like to emphasize this. Creation comes from a primordial sea of chaos. Creation does not come from this lovely light and happiness and all being. Creation started from a primordial sea of chaos. So That's what it was. This primordial sea of chaos that was endless. It was unyielding. There was no land. There was no nothing. There was nothing to be able to distinguish between the sky. Nothing to be able to like even have them come up to meet to each other. There was no winds, no nothing, absolutely nothing. It was just this void of chaos that was just swirling and sitting there, waiting for something to happen. And then all of a sudden, one day, out of that void emerged the celestial couple Izanagi and Izanami. They were actually divine siblings, but then also a couple, and they were actually born of the highest kami, aka Source, who apparently is just swirling around in the primordial sea of chaos. And out emerge these guys. And they show up in their forms. They were actually talked about, like when they first popped up, to be like shimmering, glimmering stars with like finally you could see like this endless like blue expanse behind them, kind of is like how it's described. And then they were clad in these robes of white silk that flowed like mist, and they stood actually upon this floating bridge of heaven. So they emerged on this like floating bridge, and then there was a span of clouds around them, and there was light, kind of like lightning, like trembling underneath their feet. And in Izanagi's hand, there was this jeweled spear, whose name was Ama no Nomoko. Its tip was actually forged from the heavens of the absolute purest crystal, and it actually, on the very tip of it, was dripping with the nectar of creation. Izanami, which is the female, and the female energy, her hair was said to be cascading like black waterfalls, and she actually held a sacred mirror, which is named Yoto no Kagimi. By the way, those names are super important because apparently the Imperial family actually still has both those items. And its surface is like said to actually reflect like a pond in complete stillness, and within it is an unborn world. So both of them apparently knew that once they were formed and they emerged, that it was their duty for creation. And so with a nod of their purpose and their intention, they both together took and they thrust the spear into the depths, and they began to stir the ocean's heart, the primordial sea's heart. This act actually is very important because in class one, when I talk about rituals and communities, it's almost always often like the priest is stirring. There's almost always like a type of tool that like looks like the spear, and it's very common. Like that stirring motion is very, very important, especially when it comes to like purification, renewal, and like creation rituals. And so it says that the waters churned, and the foaming and the frothing ended up like looking like breath of a sleeping dragon, and it ended up forming the swirling chaos. And as that forming chaos continued to swirl, and the sleeping dragon like laid there with its smoke breathing, arose the very first island, which is Japan. So again, in Shintoism belief system, like they do believe that Japan is the very first piece of land to ever exist on Earth, which is why it is so sacred. Um, and so then from it, on this very rugged mound of earth and rock, this was, like I said, the seat of Japan's archipelago. The couple then descended upon it, and they started walking on it. And as soon as their feet touched the soil for the first time, as soon as their feet touched the soil, the land completely woke up. And it started pulsing, and its veins started filling up with the kami's lifeblood. And this is where we get that belief system of animism in Shintoism at its core, where everything is flowing with a divine energy. Everything from this land is full of it. And Izanagi and Izanami, they walked hand in hand around the aisles, and they walked the entire rim and the entire perimeter while they were chanting. And as they chanted, from our union, let the world be born, let islands rise, and kami adorn. And then when they were finally done, they got to the central pillar, and they circled it once more. And Izanagi, speaking first, said, "What land do you see, my sister wife?" And Izanami replied, "A land of beauty, vast and green." And because of that, their words were sealed as a spell, and that is why Japan is what it is and why it looks the way that it looks. From those words, their union sprang the 8 great islands of Japan, and each of them was seen as a very beautiful, sparkling jewel amongst the primordial sea. Their shores were lapped by the waves, and it ended up carrying the echoes of creation out from their shores out to the rest of the world. But within that, it also shows that there is sorrow, there is pain, and there is destruction. Because Izanami's first child, Hiroku, which ended up being like a malformed leech child, some say possibly considered the first yokai. This is actually still up for debate, and I'm still actually looking to find where this agreement's landing on. But he was actually cast adrift on a reed boat and left out into the primordial sea as a reminder that chaos always lingers at the edge of birth. Because what they say is he was malnourished and deformed because they didn't do the ritual in the exact correct way. So apparently the first time they did it, Izanami spoke first instead of Izanagi. And it actually traditionally is supposed to be the other way around. He should have spoke before her. And so because that didn't happen the first time, that's why they end up with Hiroku, and that's why he has to be let go as well. So there's that. And then because this happens and he was set adrift, she actually ends up, after he's set adrift, she ends up giving birth to their next child, which they do after they do the ritual again, and they switch who speaks first. They do it again, and they birth their first child, which is actually the fire god, Kaguchisuji. And it actually ends up being even more devastating this time around because his flames actually completely scorch her body. Izanami's body is completely started on fire. She's scorched, and she ends up having to descend down into Yomi, which is what is the Shinto underworld. There, she actually becomes a goddess of death because obviously she descended down into the Yomi world. And Izanagi decided to actually follow her down there and try to get her back. He was grieving so hard that he pursued her, but then when he came across her, she had already been in Yomi so long that she had started to decompose, like her physical body, and maggots were feasting on her flesh. He was disgusted by her, grossed out by her, and he actually ended up fleeing from her, running all the way back up to the cave where she entered Yomi at, sealed the gates with the boulder, leaving her there. Because he was so like disgusted and grossed out by that. And from that grief was actually born the sun goddess Amaterasu, which is probably one of the most important and powerful ones actually in the entire belief system, and the storm god Susanoo. Susanoo was actually technically born from like the force of his sneeze, and then the goddess Amaterasu was born from his tears. Amaterasu is the world's light, and then Susanoo is the fury. Fury that is birthed from his loss. And this right here, the one that I just told you, that is the myth that really, really sits at the heart of Shintoism. Like I talked about while I was telling you, that sacred act of stirring is really important. That circular motion that bursts not only like out of the primordial sea. Like it's super important. It's in rituals. It's called a goni is what it's called. It's technically a wand, but they use it to purify space. And it's really, really important. So we see that in all of that. So you see a lot of the traditions, a lot of things that happen actually in the rituals, community rituals, are in this one myth right here. And this creation myth also is incredibly important for the imperial family. That's where they get a lot of like, it comes to their power and their lineage. And it also is what helps Japan, I personally believe, and from what I've read from a lot of people, it also allows that unity that they have, why they were able to be so isolated for so long from the rest of the world without even any desire to really expand, because they believe that they are really, truly, that is the first piece of land that was ever created, which is what makes it so beautiful, and the energy and the kami that's there and all the magic that's walking through there. And then you also have to remember too that we talk about how creation always isn't perfect. I mean, her first child wasn't perfect. But we still need to be resilient, and there's always lessons to be had, especially from our imperfections, especially from the mistakes we make. And we actually learn the most, even in our magical practices, which is really why we're talking about this too, is to blend in with our magical practices and our energy work. I've learned the most about my magic and what I can do with it from mistakes I've made, from unintended consequences I had not accounted for that ended up smacking me in the face, and from lessons I've learned from diving into magic I wasn't ready for, or not fully studying something. So some of the biggest mistakes that you can make, or combining two deities that really shouldn't have been near each other. Um, but you learn, like I said, you learn some of your biggest stuffs, some of your biggest, most important things from those mistakes while you're creating, which is really, really why it's important to hang on to them. Okay. So the next really important myth, let me just jump into the chat quick. Okay, I don't see anything sitting there, so we should be good. Okay, so the next super important myth is the one that's Amaterasu and the cave, and it's actually a tale of the light's return. This one is also very central into Shintoism myth. You'll hear this one often. Whew. I apologize. Apparently, I am tired. But you'll hear this one often. It's even sang as lullabies sometimes. I've actually come across a couple different songs about it. But Amaterasu, she's so important. She's so important. She's the sun, she's the light, she's everything. Um, I'm not gonna go into super detail with her right now because I did teach an entire class on her alone. It's already on YouTube. You get to meet, I'll even meet her, like I summoned her and everything there. Amaterasu, she's lovely. But like we talked about a little bit before, she's a daughter of Izanagi. She was born from his left eye in that moment of divine purification. That was his tear. She was the embodiment of the heaven's glory, and her hair really was flowing like rivers of sunlight, and her robes were embroidered with patterns of dawn, and she ruled the high plane of heaven with the utmost of grace and beauty and tranquility, like all of that. From up high in her plane of heaven, she always inspired the kami to dance because she was so lovely and full of light and so full of joy. And her presence ensued that the crops always grew and the rivers ran. So, like she really was the promise of life's eternal cycle. She was the reason for life and all of that. But harmony is not without its shadows. So we're in Shintoism, which means that everything has harmony, which just because there's a bunch of light doesn't mean there's not shadows. So in comes her brother Susanoo. Susanoo, who was born at the same time as her, like we just talked about in the previous myth, is a storm god. He is wild, he is untamed, and he descended from the heavens actually in a massive rage one day. His sword was dripping with blood of the dragons he had slain, and his eyes were flashing with lightning in them. And he was just pissed off because he's jealous, honestly, of Amaterasu. He was mad that she was getting so much favor that he wasn't, that he was having to descend down to Earth. And so he just literally went on a rampage. He went on he threw a temper tantrum, he threw a fit, and decided to just destroy things throughout the celestial fields in the heavens. Like he was just throwing shit all over the place. He ended up actually picking up, flaying, and flaying a pony, and then flinging that flayed pony into the weaving hall of Amaterasu's, where a bunch of her handmaidens were, and where a bunch of her handmaidens were hiding. And when he flung that, it got caught into some looms, caused a bunch of chaos, and he actually ended up killing one of Amaterasu's handmaidens, which made her heartbroken. She felt betrayed. She was super upset. So she actually retreated, and hid in a cave. This cave ends up with its own name, which is Ama no Loto. And she actually seals herself in there with a boulder. Like she's like, I'm out. Done, gone. I'm not dealing with your shit anymore. I'm upset. I'm grieving. Don't want to deal with this. So she decided she wants to isolate. And because she does that and she is literally a source of light, the world actually plunges into complete darkness. Sound familiar, by the way? What happens when Persephone gets taken into the underworld with Hades? world, darkness, and then people have to intervene, which is what happens here. So again, I this is one thing that I love too about religions and cultures and belief systems is all of those threads that you'll find that are just so similar. So this story is very similar to Demeter and Hades and Persephone in the fall. But the world plunged into darkness, the sun was vanishing, crops withered. They were literally even underneath a starless sky because the stars weren't even coming out because Amaterasu controls light, like all light. So there's literally just this black, expansive sky at night. The kami were actually even wailing in despair all around the realm. Rivers were completely frozen. The winds were howling all over the place without any type of sense of direction. The land was groaning in silence, and it was just awful. So the other kami were like, okay, we need to do something. Like, we have to do something. We can't just leave it like this. And so some main kami, a group, I think of, if I remember correctly, about 6 or 7 of them, gathered at the cave's entrance, and they all started just shouting choruses of pleas. Like they were just trying to get her to come out. They're like, Amaterasu, like, please, 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 just come out. We understand that you're upset by Susanoo's fury, and we understand, we get it, but like she would not come out. Like she was like, no, not doing this, done, like out. So then it actually came up to Amu no Uzumi, who is actually the goddess of dawn and mirth and revelry. And she came up with this really, really interesting plan. So what she did is she decided that she was going to strip completely naked, take her plaits out of her hair, so it was just the long black hair, and she was just going to start dancing. And she was going to dance on top of like this wooden box to make it loud. She's going to stamp her feet. She was going to dance. She was going to laugh. She was going to make it sound like she was having so much fun, and she was gonna have drums beating. And then what ended up happening is all the kami got around they all got loud, they were beating drums, there was laughter, there was noise, they were all so happy, so excited that Amaterasu had no choice but to peek out behind that boulder and see what was going on. She's curious. She just needed to know what's happening. So she did that. She moved the boulder just a little bit. She peeked out. And in that exact moment, Uzumi actually held up a mirror, Yato no Kamigi. So the one that Uzanami had during creation, she held up that mirror to reflect the goddess's very own radiant beauty back to her. Because she hasn't seen herself in a really long time while she's been isolating. And the kami all cried because they were so excited that she had returned. She was so beautiful. And she was actually so dazzled by her own light that she decided to come out and join the fun and let the whole world be bathed in her sunlight again. So that myth is super, super central to the Shinto religion. It talks about the sympathy of loss and renewal. It talks about like how the cave's darkness really mirrors like the soul's need to withdraw, and the mirror's reflection is that spark of like that self-recognition that pulls us back into that light. So I try to tie to that a little bit. If you've ever dealt with depression, if you've ever dealt with any like type of trauma or anything like that, you know those moments when you feel yourself like sinking, and like you're in that hole, and like that depression's creeping up, that darkness is coming around, that cloak and that blanket just it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and you know that you withdrew for the time being, that was healthy, but you're about to reach that point where it's not healthy anymore, where that isolation is going to be too much and it's going to swallow you up. And then all of a sudden there's just like this self-awareness, this self-reflection, this thought that you had that starts this self-recognition that really just kind of like pulls you back up just a little bit into that light to like get you back there. That's what this story is really also talking about. It's really reminding you of that resilience that you have in your ability to be self-aware, in your ability for self-recognition, and that you have that source and that power and that sovereignty, that divinity to be able to do that. So that's another reason and another layer to this story that's really nice, that I really like. It's also teaching you the balance of joy and sorrow. It's teaching you about consequences of like your actions. It's teaching you about jealousy and how humans and kami, and we all face it, and the flaws and the consequences like they can have. Um and yeah, Okay. So the last big myth that I'm gonna talk about that's a foundational myth. I'm gonna jump in the chat just to see if I see anything. And take a drink of water. Um, okay, so the next big myth that I'm gonna jump into, so I want to try to get this done so I can actually do the meditation. I might not have time for it, to be honest. Myth telling. Sometimes takes me longer than I expect. But the next one that's really important is actually Susanoo's banishment. Um, so because he also did that, and the whole situation with Amaterasu, because of the whole issue with him killing one of her handmaidens, and then she disappeared, and they had to get her out. He actually was banned from the high heavens. He was banished to land below, where he ends up having to find his redemption throughout his heroic deeds in order to be able to come back into the heavens. And this narrative is actually etched in stone. And this is actually at Izumotishu, which it actually teaches about redemption through action. And like this one is actually like that's also why I want to talk about it and why it's a fundamental one. Because this one's in stone. This one just isn't like etched on a this isn't just some text somewhere. So it talks about um so it starts more towards the beginning to where it talks about all the way back in the beginning where Izanagi goes his underworld journey, his tale of grief and purification, and then you have Susanoo's born. And the thing with it is though is that Susanoo is born specifically from the part of Izanagi who is so heartbroken that he pursues her, and as he's pursuing her, he is slashing his sword everywhere at the Lu demons that block his way. Like he is using all of his rage that's born out of grief to slash his way to her and fight his way to her. So we have to remember that like that's the energy that he's born from, and that's the part of the story that really matters when it comes to him. And he fights his way out of there too in order to end up getting her there. And so what ends up happening is that after he is exiled in a sense to the land below, he actually stumbles across like this family, and their daughter has been kidnapped, and he offers it's a farmer, by the way, which is kind of important. He this farmer's daughter, and she's been kidnapped, and so he actually petitions to rescue her. But in order to rescue her, he will only agree to doing it if he gets to marry the daughter when he comes back and make her a wife. And like that way he has somewhere to be, he has purpose, he is because he was wandering for a while and it was making him sad, he was grieving, he was upset, and he wanted a place to be. And so her family actually agreed to it. So then you see in that the story to where Susanoo, like he literally like fights like tooth and nail to save her. He rescues her, brings her back to his family, and he actually does end up being her wife. They end up getting married, and then that's his heroic deed where he actually ends up being redeemed in order to go to allow himself to have rights back up to heaven. So that one's important as well. There's not as much detail to that one, but it is important because they talk about the fact that you have the ability to redeem yourself, that no matter how much damage that you can do, you do have the ability to redeem yourself through actions. And that you have the ability to go from a heart of stone to a hero start. So a storm, like to be complete mess of fury and storm into actually being like a hero and being able to care about others and having compassion and having all the things that you would need to have that. The only other like major legend that you really will come across is going to be like there's an 8 million kami legend where it represents that since 8 is symbolization of infinity, that there is the Kojoki list, and it lists over 300, and each with a tale of like yokai and komi and kami and like what they are and who they are. And they all have their own narratives. Most of these are written down in the Shoman times, and they're written in the like they're like I said, they're written in Koji, and they teach. And this is really where you get that idea that the divine is everywhere. And there are variants of them as well, so remember that. But they claim in this text, they have written over 300 of them, but they also do say there's 8 million kami total at all times. And there's a total of 8 million kami, and that symbolizes infinity, which is the perfectionism of the energy of the divine. So that's also important to note as well. So there are 8 million kami for us to call in at all times, and spirits for us to interact with and connect with. So the next section that we're going to go into is actually going to talk about a couple of the specific kami, the really important ones. Give you a brief breakdown of who they are, and a little bit of their myths, so that you guys have a little bit more of an understanding of them. Because I remember in class 1, I did a lot of the ceremonies, the rituals. I talked a lot about the kami dana. I talked a lot about the text and the history. And this is more of like those myths, those legends. So with it comes to the kami and like meeting the divine spirits of Shintoism. Oh my goodness, what is going on here? That's interesting. Okay, sorry, my computer's funky with the Zoom, but it stopped now. So we're gonna start with Inari. Inari is okay. I have a preference for Amaterasu, and she's really, really important, but Inari is super, super important too. I also love Inari too because of Kitsune. But Inari is very, very important. And I need to make sure that I say they with Inari as well. A lot of times you'll see Inari referenced as she, and a lot of times you'll see Inari in like a woman form, a female form. But Inari is technically very, very, very gender fluid. And Inari is the kami of rice, prosperity, and foxes specifically. And they are super, super important because in Japan, one of the major staples is rice fields. They stretch like an emerald sea, like out as like from the mountains. And it is said that Inari actually dwells there within them. She's the reason why they even have the ability, and she gave them the knowledge, or they gave. They see she, because in that story she actually is a woman in that story, like physically, but they actually are the ones that taught and gave the knowledge to be able to plant rice and to be able to have rice as crops. And they are seen as very, very fluid with their grace as well, have absolutely endless generosity. And that they actually are but they're also very, very, like I said, they're ever shifting. They're very fluid because prosperity and abundance is fluid. Because they're tied to rice as well, very specifically. You have to look at the fluidity that has to be tied to that, even when it comes to the planting season versus the harvesting season, and understanding the cycle. They are known as the one who actually blesses the grain with golden life. And also represented with kitsunes and the fox for their absolute cunning wisdom. They were born from the divine union of Izanagi and Izanami in the Kojoki's cosmic dawn. So Inari emerged actually not as like a fixed form, but actually as like a dance of energies, which is why Inari is also considered fluid and considered very gender fluid. Because when you look at the birth story of Inari, when they were born and they emerged, again, they didn't have this physical form. It wasn't this male or female, but this dance of energies. Often, though, you'll see them represented as a radiant woman with like hair that really flows like the rice stalks, and then colors that are like the autumn fields. And then you'll also see them. This is my favorite, and this is why I really like her. This is why I connect to Inari a lot. You'll see, and Inari is around my home all over the place. And in my practice, Inari is the kitsune. Inari is seen as the fox, the 9 tails curling up and the smoke coming out of them, and the sacred, often blue fire. And then they're often depicted as, like I said, being very gender fluid, and they're able to embody all of the world's dualities. So you'll see them in some stories, even in like more of a male body. Often, though, you also get the gender fluidity because of that transition from just an energy form to off to that female humanoid form to the kitsune fox form, which is where you'll see that. So when you look around Japan, and if you know Japan, and you look at those little fox statues, the Fushimi Inari Toshina Shrine, especially in Kyoto, which has thousands of them, by the way, thousands of torii gates that actually wind up in a fox's tail and path up the hill. And then there's foxes everywhere. Those are for her. Foxes and kitsune, they're very sacred to her. They're her messengers. They're because she can also, it is said that that is one of her forms. And that when you go up the path, I want to go here someday so bad, like it's my dream. But when you go up that path, like you're supposed to be leaving offers for rice and sake and fried tofu, like at each one. That way you can actually coax the favor from the kami's paws and from the foxes themselves. Because they're very, like I said, she's known for her prosperity because she's tied to rice, which has to do with the more, like, obviously in an agricultural society, and when it comes to farming and things like that, the more you have of crops, the more prosperity and abundance you're going to have. You're going to actually have food to feed your family, and then obviously for selling purposes as well. So it's actually said that when famine ever grips the land, that the people actually cry to the heavens for the sustenance. That a white fox actually will come down and descend from the clouds. Its fur is actually usually shimmering with fresh snow, and it's usually carrying a sheath of rice in its mouth to actually go and plant down in the spring. Um, and the fox will actually end up picking a humble farmer to hide the spring. And it'll bring it, and it's said in the very, very first story that this is actually what happened as well. That this very, very, very beautiful fox came down, showed this farmer where this hidden spring of water was. All of a sudden, water started bubbling up and coming to life. And from that spring, then grew the very first crop of rice. And its stalks were really heavy with golden grains. And the farmer ended up giving gratitude, and they built a shrine there. And the fox actually stayed there, lived there, and kept itself there. And it revealed itself as Inari themselves. And then Inari promised and vowed to protect the harvest if they were continued to be honored with purity and respect. And ever since then, they still say that this happens, especially when droughts happens. They still say that this happens often over Japan. Inari is and has been the patron for merchants, artisans, and farmers. And her fox messengers, the kitsune, are actually thought of and seen to be scampering throughout the night to deliver prosperity to those who are humble and mischief to those who are not, and misfortune to those who do not give Inari the proper respect. I can attest to the fact that yes, kitsunes do run around. My own personal, like my guide that's been with me the longest is a kitsune, and I see them often. When I don't see them is when I'm concerned. Because that means that something's going on with my abundance and prosperity flow, and I need to figure out what's going on there. Um, and you will often see them at night. That's why it's really nice to be up late, because you'll actually get to experience and see them coming around. There's lots and lots of stories of them, by the way. You'll see them in the Nihon Shokai multiple different times where they talk about Inari's fluidity. You'll also see in the Nihon Shokai where Inari shows up as a bearded man, to a warrior in need. And then later you'll also see them show up as a maiden to a poet seeking inspiration. So they show up all over the place when it comes to wisdom and teaching you many different things. Um, and they also really allow you to embrace all forms of yourself, which is really another reason why I really love them. I'm all about being just my most authentic version of myself. I really don't care what other people think about me, and I embrace all parts of me as I am. And she's really great for allowing you to do that. And she's really great for that because of fluidity and how she teaches you that. The next deity that we're going to talk about is going to be Susanoo. So we've talked about him a little bit. And we've actually talked about a lot of his, actually, no, I've talked about almost all of his stuff actually already. The only thing that I'll touch on here is, so we've already talked about, in his exile, how he goes, he kills the eight-headed dragon, which by the way, okay, is an eight-headed dragon, by the way, he killed in order to rescue the kidnapped maiden that ends up becoming his wife, and that he ends up redeeming himself for. It actually is also said that he actually doesn't go back to the heavens. He stays with his wife here. And that's also why his storms are much more tamed. And they don't have quite as many storms, and that he actually uses them more to nourish the land now because his chaos was able to be tamed a little bit more by her. And then the other thing is that his sword, which is Kusanagi, it's actually one of Japan's three imperial regalia, and they still have it, and they still keep it, and they actually even take it out to reenact this specific tale, of him killing the eight-headed dragon. And if you want to draw a parallel to any other pagan religions, his sword would be comparable to like Thor's hammer. Like that's like how important it is. And Japan actually claims they still have it. Like this is like I don't know how the United States government didn't get their hands on it after World War II, but apparently they still have this. They still have this. They were able to hide this well enough to where this one was not confiscated. And it is considered one of their three imperial regalias. Next we have Amaterasu, which we already talked about her a lot. Actually, I don't know if I'm gonna talk about her anymore, to be perfectly honest, because I already did her whole story and I did a whole other class on her. So let's do Tsukuyomi first. So Tsukuyomi, which is another super, super important deity. I picked the four main ones. Tsukuyomi is the moon god. So not just a moon god, but he's also the guardian of night and also keeper of our secrets, which is something I really like about Tsukuyomi. Um, I like Tsukuyomi a lot as well because this is one of few instances throughout cultures to where you'll see the moon be a masculine energy and not a feminine energy. Um, this is actually kind of like the way that I prefer to work with the moon is actually from Tsukuyomi's energy standpoint and from the masculine standpoint and the masculine energy. Um, it's it's quite kind of explain why I like it this way. Hmm. When you think about energies, even as a whole, like masculine and dark, like when you masculine feels more of like that darkness. Not like in like the bad, like judgmental, like evil way, but like masculine is like more of that like heavy, that protector, that like darkness, that like and even a lot of times, even nowadays, you think about masculine, it's more of that, I don't know, their masculine energy is better with the secrets, even, and it's better with the things that are in the dark that you don't really want to talk about, you don't want to deal with, you don't want to work with. And feminine energy is much more emotional and vibrant and like moving and like that creativity and that creation, which is why I resonate more with that Amaterasu and the feminine side of the sun, which again is different than a lot of belief systems. So it's one thing that I really, really do like about this is that Tsukuyomi again as a moon god in Shintoism, you get more of that darkness, that heaviness, that protectiveness when it comes to the night. And when you're working with the moon in this way, because he is that way. He actually is he is quite protective. So when it comes to Tsukuyomi, he actually has this pale luminescent form. Like he's very, very this almost ethereal is almost how I would kind of explain it. And he was actually born from Izanagi's right eye. So, you know how Amaterasu was born from his left eye during the divine purification after he came up, and Susanoo was from his sneeze? Tsukuyomi came from his right eye. And this is when he was washing away like all of the pollution and anything that was in Yomi while he was fighting the glue to get back up here. Like he is from that purification tear coming down his eye. Like that's where he's from. Which is important because it ties him to that serenity. It ties him to be that calmness that kind of comes a little bit more with that moon. Also, that sorrow that's coming from the grief that's being washed down within that teardrop that he was created in, and then renewal, because obviously he's coming from Yomi to go back up to the heavens. This is the renewal, this is the embodiment, this is all of that. So he, like I said, he's the embodiment of night. He is the keeper of secrets. He's that really, really pale luminescent figure. He sends, in most images you'll see him with like robes that are like woven from these very silken threads, like almost like twilight. You'll have like silver and indigo-y colors with him. You'll kind of like you're almost trying to catch like stars twinkling. He is, again, like I said, considered the great kami of the moon. He rules the nocturnal heavens with his very calm and soothing presence. He is very present in dreams, very, very, very much rules dreams. He is ensuring that our tides rise and fall with the rhythm of the heart. He also fills like night creatures with their wisdom. He makes sure the woods are there to hold secrets. He's there to make sure shadows are cast during the day so that things that need to not be revealed aren't, and they're kept where they're supposed to be kept. And all of that fun stuff. His legend unfolds inside of the Kojoki, and he is actually a tale of betrayal and separation. And his tale explains the internal divide that happens between day and night. So why the sun and moon are forever chasing each other, why they never meet, and why they are separated. So sent by Izanagi to visit the food goddess Ukimochi, Tsukiyomi actually descended to Earth, like in a chariot of silver clouds, to go visit her. His path actually ended up like creating like this frosty path behind him. And Uzuyaki, the goddess of sunsets, actually welcomed him with a feast, but she did it in her very own divine way. So she had transformed her very own body to actually provide the meal. So from her mouth, she literally just like opened her mouth and like rice sprang out of it. And they were supposed to eat the rice that came out of her mouth. And then from out of her eyes, fish came out. From out of her nose, silkworms came out. And so on and so on and so forth. Well, Tsukiyomi thought that this was really, really disgusting. Didn't like it. Thought it was gross. Didn't think it was generous. Didn't think it was like none of that. He saw it as a very gross and grotesque desecration of what the miracle of creation actually should be. Because he considered himself to have a much more refined palate, and he just thought, ugh, no. He was so disgusted and so recoiled by that he just, in a complete fit of disgust, picked up his sword and literally beheaded her. Just killed her. Just killed her. So because he did this, Amaterasu, which is her sister, was so upset. She was so outraged. She was so furious. She refused to ever share the sky with the killer of her sister again. She's like, nope, never. I will never share the sky with Tsukiyomi again. I will never be near him again. I will never look at him again. I want nothing to do with him. So therefore, Tsukiyomi was then banished to the night, and the sun goddess Amaterasu got to stay exactly where she was. And her brother stayed in the night, she stayed in the day, and their paths are literally only crossing during dawn and dusk. That's it. They don't interact, they don't speak, nothing. So it does take place in the Kojiko, and then it does show up again in the Honshoki. So just to make sure that you're aware that like it is repeated. So it is in both of them. In the second version, they try to make it seem less about murder and more about like a cultural clash. and that they just didn't get along. But in the first one, like it's very clear, like he literally out of nowhere picks up his sword and just beheads her. So that is another super important story, because obviously day and night happens off of that. And then Tsukiyomi is really important for that reason because he's the moon as well. Okay, I'm gonna try to cruise through this last little chunk here so that hopefully I can get the meditation done and it's not too late. So the other entities that we have that show up within Shintoism's really mystical world are not just the kami, but there's also the yokai. Um, I love yokai. If you've watched anime, you've definitely heard this word before. Like, there's no way you haven't. Like, you've definitely heard the word yokai. You've probably even heard specifically of kitsune. You've probably heard of tengu. You've probably heard of oni. You've probably heard of kappas. Like, if anime is something that you've watched, you've definitely heard of this. But it's not just an anime thing. Like, this is legit in Shintoism mythology and belief. And what yokai actually are is they are beings that exist in this veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary. They are beings that exist in between, like where kami and everything else exists. But they're not just like these mere shadows that exist. Like they are actual, like they're beings and they're entities and they're part of the same divine cloth that we ourselves are from and that the kami themselves are from. They're just experiencing it from a different energy perception. They're wild, they're untamed echoes of the cosmos, but they're still born from the same primordial stir of Izanagi and Izanami's jeweled spear. And they're still just as important. A lot of times, though, they're very playful. They're very like that trickster, mischievous energy. They can also be very fierce guardians and very vengeful spirits. They can also be incredibly wise messengers. So there's a lot to them. So when you're really gonna see them and they're gonna be active, it's gonna be in those twilight hours. So in those hours where we're already in that really liminal space. Can you just like hear how excited I get talking about yokai? But in that really liminal space. So when we're in twilight, when we're in dusk, it's when it like the sun gets below that horizon, the stars are just hesitating to rise, and like back and forth, like that's when they really awaken, they come to life. That's why I'm out every night. Like I literally sit outside like for hours at night. Like I work outside every night. Like I don't like because I want to be around these guys. Like they're just so and honestly they're fun. But they have a lot of wisdom and a lot of lessons to teach you too. But they really just they come out. They come out of the cracks. They come out and they're really like they are harmonious forms of the world. But their forms actually they pass a very different type of shadow, a very different type of energy. And yokai actually often translates to simply just a bewitching apparition or a strange phenomenon. So like that's all they are. Like they're just these different entities. They're these different enigmas that are experiencing things from a different perspective. But again, they were still born from the same primordial chaos of creation that we are. They're just restless energy of the lands itself even sometimes. So it could be that a yokai was simply born from a very specific area, that the land was getting really restless and it had something to say and it had something that needed accomplished, and that's what happened. But what's different about yokai versus kami is that unlike the kami who embody the sacred essence of natures and ancestors, yokai are they're liminal. They are liminal, they're wanderers. They often bring about, like I said, mischief or warnings or wisdom or wonder, and they emerge like gaps in between the seen and the unseen. They are that entity that exists between the human and the divine. And their history is just as old as Shinto. You'll see them back as far as the Jomon period in 14,000 BCE. Like you'll see them crystallize in Edo period, where there are actually illustrations of them. In 1776, they catalog at least 300 of them. We have the story to where that they're part of the 800 and the 8 million that exist. You have plenty and plenty and plenty of folklore throughout history, um, and even oral and written down folklore of many different people of Japan having interactions with yokai. From the kappa who are the water imps with webbed hands and the dishes on their heads, where they're actually filled with the river's life force, to the Oni, who are really, really protective entities. Um, they're all over the place, but they really, really do end up bridging. They're that bridge and that liminality between human and divine. They teach us also through terror sometimes, through humility, through respect, but also through delight. So it really, really just depends on which yokai you're experiencing and which one you're actually interacting with. There's a couple I'm going to break down for you quick because I think they're important. There are a lot. The tengu are super, super important. The tengu are actually considered mountain guardians, and they're considered warriors of wisdom and of the wind. So most often not tengu, you're really only going to see them and find them in mountains, specifically like the Japanese mountains, but in the mountainous area. Sometimes other regions as well. But they also do like to be where there's pines twisting and lots of trees. And there's like the ancient, like they're reaching their fingers, like the really ancient fingers towards the sky. And they are actually born of the union of storm and spirit. And so Tango are actually these bird-like warriors. So they have these like black raven-like wings on their backs. Their noses are long, kind of more like a beak. Their eyes are really, really sharp. And it's like they are they're fast as shit. Like they can cut through clouds. Like they're known to be warriors. It's actually even said that during the Heian period, they actually evolved their very own type of martial arts and started training actually humans and training their very own specific type of martial arts to the Japanese people. And that's why a lot of samurais were actually really well trained because they were trained by Tengu, which are the mountain guardians and the warriors. And they evolved the Daitengu. They even have their very own dojos throughout mountains. It's even said that one of the Yashido Sune, which is one of the most legendary generals in all of Japan's history, it's actually said that he had very specific Tengu training, that he actually had been enclosed within a very specific, the Kanjoku Manjutsaro dojo, which is a Tengu dojo, and that his body was actually so battered from the winds and from the howling and from how much that they put him through that anything that a human could put him through was nothing compared to it. Which is why he was such an amazing general and so gruesome in battle. They also though taught you though that you didn't get it just through like your martial arts skills. It also they talked about the importance of wisdom and enlightenment, which comes from their essence in connecting to the wind and the air, and they're really a symbol of transcendence. But then again, if you didn't listen to them and you pissed them off, they're also known to be very hubris, and they would mess around with monks sometimes. There's even kind of like a story and a legend that their nose are actually long, and they're super long because the Tengu actually originally were monks who had fallen from favor because of their pride, and their noses just kept growing because of pride and pride and pride. And a lot of times monks in Japan, they are very, very heavily trained in martial arts, and they're trained in many different styles, kendo and bushido and quite a few different others. So that, I don't know, that actually makes sense to me in that story, to be honest. That is another legend that comes around. Tengu actually are thought to be the sacred the guardians of the mountain themselves, and they actually have hidden dojos again on them, and they will train those who are worthy. So they will very easily interact with humans. They're known to interact with humans a lot. If they don't think you're worthy, though, then they're going to be a little bit more of a trickster with you. And there are certain folklores talking about Tengu, like actually abducting children, and then keeping them to train them and become specific warriors. Um, okay. So Tengu, they're super cool. I love the Tengu. So next we have the Kappa. The Kappa are actually the river imps, and they're guardians of water and mischief. So they're said to be in the rivers, very specifically in the rivers. Um, and they like to be over smooth stones. They also like to they think that the currents are like singing lullabies. So when you hear and you listen and you hear the water singing, a lot of time that's actually a kappa. And that they actually really like to lurk there because they're very cunning. They like whimsy. It's said that they can even drown a man simply just by laughing, or they can save a child simply with a splash. They were born from the foam of the primordial ocean when Izanagi and Izanami were stirring. So that's where kappas were born. That foam that I was talking about when I was telling that story, they came specifically out of there. Their skin is green, like pond scum, and on the very tops of their head, they actually have a dish of liquid. And it's said that that dish of liquid actually holds their life force in it. And that's why they want to make sure that they don't spill it. They have webbed hands and feet for paddling in depths, like the rivers that they are very much a part of. The very first time that you see one talked about is actually in the Heian period, which is in 794 CE, and it's very like they pop up in folklore, where they talk about some mischievous sprites that were actually like dragging swimmers to the bottom, and they had the strength of 10 men, and they were able to pull them through the undertow. But at the same time, we also do have stories where they're not all just malice. Where they, like I said, they can save children with splashes. And that dish on their head, which is also called the shuranchi, it's not only like it's said that if you tip it because it has a life force in it that you'll end up weakening them, but also for us, you see it as a symbol of balance. So it's actually telling you to be able to balance your ability between power and vulnerability, especially with water and rivers. I mean, waters can be super, super, super destructive, but we also need it for life. It's life force. So understanding that, there's a couple of folklore stories too, where you'll see them, especially during the Edo periods, where they'll come up out of waters, wanting to marry like certain fishermen's daughters, in order to get them. Sometimes this happens, sometimes it doesn't. So, but that also shows that interaction with humans, and that it's not always bad. And then they also are seen as serving as guardians a lot of times to fishermen and ships and boats and those that are going to be near the river and by the river. So they're also known for that. And then as long as you respect the flow of water, typically kappas are going to respect you and they're not going to be super mischievous. Let's see. Okay, next is kitsune. I already talked about kitsunes a little bit, but I love them. I love kitsunes. I love kitsunes a lot. Before I even knew what they were, I was in love with them. Because I've had my guide with me for an incredibly long time. I just didn't know what she was. I didn't realize that she was specifically from here until I came across Shintoism. I thought that's just who my guide was. Um, but kitsunes are awesome. They are actually born of foxfire. So a lot of times you'll see them with like green flames or blue flames to understand like the foxfire. And foxfire is actually said to have been created underneath the underbrushes from stars that have fallen to Earth. So them being born in that, it's like the hottest flames that you can find actually within creation in the universe. And they are Spock spirits. And a lot of times with Kitsune, what's really, really awesome, like nice about them too, is they are beings of elegance, but they're also incredibly multi-layered beings. They can be very mischievous. They can be full of mystery, but then they can also be super, super protective. They can be super guiding, and they can lead a soul to your absolute fortune. But then if you aren't respectful, if you aren't humble, they can also trick you, and you can, with a flick of your tail, you're gonna end up in an illusion. They are born from the wild essence of a Nari themselves, which again, we talked about them before. Nari is that gender fluid kami of rice and prosperity. So they are very cunning. They are full of devotion, especially specifically to her, to her flow of prosperity, abundance, and to those that they have connections to. They are very, very, very devoted beings. So they can look many different ways. I've seen kitsune look very many different types of colors, very many different types of patterns. Often you're going to see them with either red fur, white fur. You'll sometimes see them with blue fur. I've seen one or two with black fur, but often you're going to see that red and white fur. The red really symbolizes, and that's why torii gates are red the way that they are. Or like I said, you'll see them white as snow, as in like on Mount Inari. Their eyes are almost always this very golden colors, very specifically tied to the harvest moon, and then their tails. Kitsune don't just have one tails, they will end up with multiple tails, and they can have up to 9, and they start with one, and their tails multiply based on age, wisdom, and then who they have served, like something that has happened when they're serving. So when you get up to 9 tails, that actually marks a very, very ancient kitsune who's been around for quite a long time. And it's actually called they actually get elevated to a mayobu. They get a status. And they themselves, kitsune, serve all of the kami with absolutely unwavering loyalty as well. Like they are very, very sacred. They are probably like one of the most sacred animals actually within all of this system. The folklore, and like that's why it's so interesting that they're considered yokai, by the way. I think it's so interesting. Um, so, but that's also because of their ability for illusion. So that's also why they're considered a little bit more mischievous. And like foxes, like they can be sly, they can be tricksters, and then they are really, really good with illusion. So a lot of times, if you've watched anime, oh, by the way, like Kitsune, Nine-Tailed Fox, like Naruto, that's where this is from, by the way, like right here. Susanoo as well for Sasuke. That big, huge, like that's this comes from here. Shintoism. But the illusion part, you'll see them be able to be fluid like Inari is and be able to move into a human form. So there's actually during the Edo period, there's actually quite a few different myths and folklores that pop up during that time, where they talk of nine-tailed fox spirits being able to be able to assume an incredibly beautiful female form, and they would actually go and try to court the emperor, and they would end up in their court, trying to like gain power or even to like marry the emperor or to marry somebody that's in high level of power, and then one way or another, somehow someone ends up finding out their true form, finding out that they are a kitsune, and then usually something bad happens. To the kitsune, actually. Whether they're executed or they're banned or exiled or, banished, different things happen. But typically, in most of those stories, the kitsune does end up found out in some way, shape, or form. But a lot of times too, they tell those stories because they're also emphasizing the fact that like love may be in place between two entities, and it may not be enough. Love can still be in play, and other things can still overpower it, and then vice versa. Which is also kind of what's interesting about the stories is they do pull on that illusion of love sometimes and how people can feel that. And then they interact as humans and as messengers. So when I see them placed in stories that actually are near political figures, I find that to also be very interesting and to notice because they are considered messengers of the kami themselves. So if you're seeing a kitsune and a kitsune is being found out and they're close to an emperor, there's probably interaction and communication happening and something going on behind the scenes that's going to change the world in a little bit. And then those kabuki masks too that you'll see a lot with like the mat like in Japan and like anime that have foxes on them, they're tied to these guys. To be able to actually retell the story of illusion and the fact that there was one actually kitsune that almost actually ended up in the emperor's court. She got pretty close. She was in the emperor's court for a while before she was actually found out. So there are, like I said, so many different versions of kitsune, and they're seen as sacred. So there is actually this distinction too, is that their 9 tails are a measure of their power and age. And then there's also Zenko, which are considered good foxes, which bring prosperity, and Yako, which are considered wild foxes, and they're the ones that more like to play the illusions and pranks. So there also are classifications, which I love because you get to see the duality at play here too. Okay. And then we have next up the Oni. Oni are super interesting. I really love the Oni. The Oni are considered demon warriors. They're guardians of rage and redemption. So if you watch anime, let's see. They're usually like the more like ogre looking type ones with like the blue skin, the red skin, the big teeth, horns on their head. They're almost always like carrying some type of club with them too. Like that's kind of what you're gonna think of. Like that's kind of more of like an Oni. So Onis actually are born from the forges of the underworld in Yomi, where the flames actually lick the sky and the earth's crack. And there's like 1,000 different suns down there. It's like just it's really hot. But that's actually where they're born. They're beings of actually really unbelievably raw, unbridled, undominatable rage and strength. Like it's literally said that they can take their club, they can swing it once and shatter a mountain. Like that's how strong they are. Or they have the ability to redeem a soul with a single act of mercy. So if you come across an Oni and like your soul is really in need of redemption and they choose to like give you mercy and like not clobber you to pieces, it is said in many different folklores, like that one simple act will literally end up completely redeeming your soul because you will never be the same person again. Because like having that amount of raw rage and power, like show you mercy is that impactful. So they were actually born from the wrath of the gods and the Kodoki. The Oni are the yokai. They are destruction, but they're destruction for the sake of protection as well. Like I said, their skin is red as blood or blue, like the deep, dark depth blue of like a storm's heart. They almost always have horns curling from their face, kind of like a crescent moon. And then often you'll see those fangs bared. Like they're bare, like they're almost always out because they want to make sure that you know that doom's coming and deliverance is coming. They became really popular during the Heian period, where you'll see the very first mentions of them, but you'll see a lot of them. Again, it's more of like you'll see them mentioned as like those ogres who terrorize villages. They would actually take and make sure their clubs, every single one of them comes from a very sacred tree. But then later, once we had our the synchronization with Buddhism fall into place, they were seen much more as guardians. And their rage actually is turned on those to defend Dharma. So their rage is only affected, like only comes out unbridled towards those who really deserve it and to those who aren't living in harmony and law. Those who are following Dharma, those who are inflicting karma. There actually is a very specific legend, um, which is it's called Otugishoshi, which tells of an Oni king actually who dwelt in a mountain cave. His horns are twisted like ancient roots, and it's said that the emperor sent Minato no Himito, which is actually one of the major, most important samurai warriors to come through to actually slay him and kill him. And this is a really popular story about that. And during that time, it said that he actually went in while he was sleeping, like went into his lair while he's sleeping. And they like poisoned his sake with a bunch of like poison, which meant him like left him kind of like really drunk still and vulnerable. So he just went in, severed his head, and even still though, while his head was being severed, he woke up in an act of defiance. He literally like bit down on his helmet still. So it just kind of like shows like how much rage can actually be there and like how protective and powerful those beings can be. They really act as destroyers and protectors, like hardcore. I love Onis because they give the vibe an energy of Kali and like Kali Ma. Like they're very protective energies to work with. But again, like you need to approach them with respect, and you need to understand, like when you are in the presence of one of these guys, it is a lot of rage in one entity, in one being. For the sake of protection, but like it's still like it radiates off of them, and you have to make sure that you're ready to handle that because it can impact you as well. So it's also said though that they're very important for guarding temples, and especially Inari statues, and small kamidanas that end up out in like small villages that need help. There are a couple other fundamental entities to think about too, which are the Tanuki, which are the shape-shifting fixtures of this forest. So they actually like keep the secrets of the forest. They know where all the hidden paths are. They know everything there is to know about the wilds. And they are there to actually teach us about the adaptability and the importance of Earth and being able to be with the Earth. And they were actually born from the kami of the wild itself. And this is found within the Nohan Shoki. And they are also the yokai that teaches about transformation and humor. So that's also why they actually play a lot of those tricks because they want to teach you humor. They are these little furry little brown creatures that like live in the woods and they like to burrow within the earth. And they are like shaped kind of like these little round little gourds and they have leaves that actually tuck behind their ears. Um, and so like they're like almost like little raccoon characters kind of, but like without like the like ringed tails and stuff. They're pretty cute little guys. Yeah. I have some more legends in there if you want to read them. Sorry, I'm just class is almost over, so I want to make sure I get to it all. Okay, so other entities that you can look at and yokai you can look at. I have a list in the study guide for you guys. It's really, really fun to actually kind of go through and look at them all. And then, yeah, I don't have time for the meditation, so I may have to just record it and hope that Alex puts it on separately, or I may just have to do like a random 30-minute class to do it because I do want you guys to actually, or I might just have to do a part 3 and have it just be the meditation. Maybe I'll do that. Because I really want you guys to like meet these guys, but it's already almost been 2 hours. That's a long time to sit and learn about something. Um, but so I think that's what I'll do. I'll do like a part 3, and that way, if there's anything else that I want to talk about with Shintoism and anything else I want to bring up that I didn't talk about in this class, the other one, I can cover that, and then we can do the movie. But feel free to look at the other yokai and other entities that are on there. There's some really, really fun and interesting, like the Baku, which is a dream eating tapir, which is super, super interesting. Shoki, honestly, they're fun. I really recommend looking into them because they're really, really fun. And also remember too, when it comes to working with any religion, any belief system, any culture, you have to make sure you're taking ethical considerations. Don't appropriate. Make sure that you're coming from a very ethical place. Make sure that you're not trying to command anything out of these. And remember, like the core part of Shintoism is what? It is a harmony. That is what's beating at the pulse of this. So there is no domination. There is no commanding. It is all about delicate balance and making sure that you approach the kami, the yokai in the world with absolute humility and respect. You approach them with an open hand. You never force them to do anything. You approach them and understand their sacred forms. Just like you have your own unchecked desires, wants, and needs, so do they. You don't get to place them in a box, just like nobody else gets to place you in a box. So making sure that you're understanding that and you're also understanding the cultural sensitivity is really at a foundation of what true magic is. Like you can't just go willy-nilly into this stuff. You can't just jump into it. You need to have the respect, the honor, and the understanding before you go and working into it. Make sure that when you also ethically engage in Shintoism practices, that you do it as a sacred part of your ecosystem. You don't just do it for the sake of doing it. This is about harmony and balance. So don't just like dip your toes. You want to make sure this is something that isn't going to disrupt your harmony or the harmony around anybody else. Because remember, even your words will ripple into the kami all around you, and it matters. It affects them, they affect you. It is this harmonious balance that we need to try to keep in place. And anytime an imbalance happens, it's going to echo back like a stone that is absolutely skipped. It's going to echo back. You know, when you skip a stone into a pond, boom, 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 that's what happens when you have that disharmony within the energy. That's why it's so important to come back and be able to pull into that and be able to approach it with respect. Make sure that you do the research, you do the energy, and remember that this is a very indigenous, ancient belief system. It is at the core of Japanese culture, it is at the core of Japanese history, it is at the core of Japanese mythology. Read and understand it before you decide to say that it's something that you want to practice. Kamidanas are not, they're they're not easy to set up, but they're an incredibly respectful place to have. And I want you to make sure that you understand that before you do that. Make sure that you understand that even though, for example, Susanoo went on a rampage and Tsukiyomi went on a rampage, there is redemption, and we need to understand that. We need to understand that entities like Oni, who mirror our rage and our shadows, that we need to do it from an ethical standpoint. We need to work with them in a place for self-reflection. We need to use their energy for justice, not to simply try to harm other people and vengeance. Also looking at it from an ethical standpoint. And also make sure that when it comes to working with these beings like kamis and entities, because this is about harmony, there is no demanding. You do not demand and tell them to do anything. You ask. You ask just like you would with any human being. So it's not like you're telling a kitsune, you are going to do this. You ask them, can you please? Will you? Are you able to? Can you guide me? And if you get silence, you get to accept that as a no. You don't keep pushing, you don't keep prying. Silence means no. Silence means no. It means no, that they are not willing to do that right now. It is not in harmony with them. The reciprocity is not going to be the same. And that's very vital in Shintoism's belief system. So make sure that you understand that, and you also understand that it also is about inclusivity. There are no real restrictions, or there isn't that dogma, there is that strict fierce punishment enforcement. Also remember that you can be inclusive and open-minded with this, because that's how you create balance and ethical awareness and self-awareness within yourself. Also, if you have dipped into the anime world, and that is kind of where you're coming at into the Shintoism, try to avoid romanticizing it. I know that there's some great fan service animes that make yokai seem very cute and attractive, and like, yes, I get it. But try not to romanticize them. Try to understand that they're beings and that they have their own wills, their own wants, their own desires, just like you do, just like I do. And it does not mean that they're all going to be this dreamy Oni that you see in this anime that makes this girl fall in love with him and changes her entire life. So just remember that. Remember that we need to not romanticize them and stay in reality. Okay, so before you guys go to bed tonight, if you'd like, I do have a closing ritual in there for you to do tonight to kind of connect you with all that we talked about, to connect you to kami, connect you to Shintoism, connect you to yokai. So if you want to, when you're done, you can go ahead and light a white candle for purity, and you can actually place a small offering like rice or water, and then chant 3 times. The chant that I have below, which is Kami of all, thank you for grace, Shinto's path, my sacred space, yokai wild, your lessons stay in harmony's web, I find my way. And then you're going to visualize a torii gate opening and the kami nodding to you and letting you know that you actually had their permission, and that you have gratitude for everything that happened tonight in this class and all the lessons you were able to get. So again, it's been 2 hours already, and I know I was gonna do a meditation. Like I said, I'm probably just gonna do a part 3. I don't know, I'll probably just do it next week. I have to get my next class scheduled. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I super, super appreciate it. I super hope that you got a lot of information about Shintoism. I hope some of it can resonate with you. I hope it can help you find Wa. I hope it can help you get into harmony. I hope it can help you kind of look more at your place energetically in the world and maybe help be more of a cornerstone with your divinity in the balance. If you do have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. This one is, like I said, it is probably one of the most simplistic belief systems I ever come across, but it's the hardest one to actually implement into your awareness and into your life. So if you can always feel free to ask me any questions, even if you're watching the recording. And again, thank you so much for being here live with me. Super, super, super appreciate it. Have a good rest of your night, guys, and look out for part 3. I will get it done soon.